Well, I think we got a pretty good showing, don't we, Janine?
Yes, we do.
Okay, welcome everybody. I see Bob Benfato and Sarah and Brian and Brian. And I think we've got a pretty good show. And there's Frank and Dolores. You're with us, Dolores, I see, and Joe is about to join. So welcome everybody. I'll give the little spiel I have to give. I'm John Danielle Nolan. I'm the chair of the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use and Zoning Committee of Manhattan Community Board 4. I want to welcome you to our January 2021 meeting. Janine Prudente is with us, our community associate, who will keep us in line and keep order and take the, make sure the votes are counted. We have an agenda tonight, 2 items on the agenda, and one important new business item, which I think may come up, which I think is important to discuss. The agenda can be seen on our website. It's the first one is a presentation by, I believe they're called MdeAS Architects or architectural firm. I hope I got it right. And it's about the McGraw Hill building, 330 West 42nd Street, a building we know well, a landmark building. They're going to propose some changes. And the second item is a discussion of, let me read this, the draft scope for the draft environmental impact statement for citywide hotel text amendment. Pretty confusing, but we'll try to sort that out. As you know, according to the executive order by the governor, 202.1, this will be done remotely, our meeting. It will be recorded, transcribed, and put on YouTube. So we're all influencers on YouTube. You can all watch it later, I'm sure you all will want to. And you kind of know how this works. Please stay muted until you're called on to talk or you want to speak. We'll try to call everybody in order. Janine will help us out on that. And members of the public and the community, we hope you're with us and you will be given a chance to talk and participate and comment all you want, usually after the committee members kind of weigh in on something. So are there any questions about how we're going to proceed? No? Frank, welcome. I see you're with us again. Without further ado, I think we can start. So I want to welcome the architects from MdeAS. I don't know.
I hate to start with a correction. It's Dan Shannon. And I love the idea that our firm is called MdeAS. It's MdeAS, just okay. As a correction. Thank you so much.
My fault, Dan. Welcome.
No, that's quite all right, but I do love MdeAS. We'll reconsider it as a new brand.
Okay, and some snakes. Put some snakes in the hair too. Dan Shannon and William Higgins, I think you are going to present to us. We know the building well, so welcome and let us know what's going on. Take it away.
Julie, I didn't see Bill on the call. Julie's also is.
I am here. Hi, Dan. It looks like Bill is actually on the attendees list rather than the panelist list. Janine, is there a way to upgrade him to panelist?
Okay, yeah, I just moved him over.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie and Janine. While we're doing that, we're really thrilled to present these proposals to the McGraw Hill building, 330 West 42nd Street, as part of a larger renovation, and Bill will take us through all aspects of that. But it, like you all, it's a building we enormously admire and look forward to presenting all of these proposals and the rejuvenation of a building that is coming online at the right time, I think, because it really is a progressive building when it was originally designed and can be again. So I don't know if Bill is with us.
Oh,
Bill, you're muted.
How's that, better?
Yes, yeah, Bill.
I'm unmuted. Okay, I thought I had unmuted first time around, sorry. Thanks for having us. I'm Bill Higgins of Higgins Quaysbarth, and we are the historic preservation consultants for the 330 West 42nd Street project, and happy to present to you tonight. We will not go into too much detail about the building's history and its architectural character, except as those directly relate to the proposal. But suffice it to say, as Dan said, that we have great affection and respect for the building. It really is one of the great examples of 1930s international style architecture by Raymond Hood, one of the great architects of that style. May we go to?
And
Yeah.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt. It is landmarked inside and outside as well.
No, it is an individual landmark, exterior only. It is not an interior landmark.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So could we go to the next slide? On the left, locating the building between 42nd and 41st Streets, between 8th and 9th Avenues. So that means that there is the main entry and storefront facade at the ground floor on 42nd Street, and a secondary ground floor treatment on 41st Street, which currently includes and historically includes loading docks and a minor entry. And we are proposing changes at both of those ground floor facades. And then a skyline view, of course, on the right, which we all recognize. Next. And existing conditions, showing the building, as we said, as really one of the terrific examples of 1930s international style architecture, with that wonderful sort of greenish, bluish, turquoise-ish terracotta cladding, those dramatic setbacks, the dramatic crown of the building, and those very characteristic, strongly expressed horizontal ribbon windows. Building is just terrific. Next. These are historical photos, which we won't belabor. It's just kind of interesting, not relevant to this proposal, but it's fascinating how, when the building was built, it was far and away the tallest thing around it, and stood out in dramatic contrast to many of these lower rise buildings. Next. Some of them, the 4 and 5 story tenement or row house buildings. Truly a dramatic building at every point in its history. Next. So the proposals that we have today are fourfold. First of all, starting from the top, we are proposing to change the name by which the building is known, from the McGraw Hill building to 330 West 42nd Street. And this is something that, as I'll mention shortly, is frequently happens with landmark buildings, even quite significant landmark buildings like this one, that their use evolves, and the names by which they are known evolve along with those changing uses. So we are proposing to change the name in terracotta in the crown of the building. Hold on a second. We are proposing Also, some identity-related changes at the ground floor of the 42nd Street facade, and also some changes to infill at the ground floor of the 41st Street facade. We are also proposing to change some of the infill of some of the existing door openings onto the 4, and in one facade 5 terraces on the upper floors of the building. Next. And these are the same interventions shown from the south. So there will be, as it were, 4 chapters to the presentation of this proposal. Next. Just for your information, these are the east and west elevations of the building, where there are no changes that are going to the Landmarks Commission, but there are some changes that are being approved at staff level, basically to rationalize the at this point kind of irregular collection of windows that have been infilled with HVAC louvers. And we are proposing to lower the number of HVAC louvers and to regularize their placement. But because that conforms to the staff level guidelines, it will not be something that is shown to the commission, but it actually is a positive step in the building. Next. And saying that shows that same situation on the other 2 facades. Next. Okay, so first of all, the proposed change to the building name at the crown of the building. Next. So as it is now, the crown of the building is this wonderful Art Deco design with a very subtle set of interrelationships of materials, brick and terracotta primarily, and very subtle relationships in plane between the setbacks that lead to the crown of the building, and then within the crown itself, these subtle relationships between the horizontal fins in terracotta, the letters and the ornament above the letters in terracotta, the framework of terracotta that supports the letters, and the brick planes behind them. You can see these in detail. And if you look at the 3 images at the bottom, you'll see basically how the signage is, or the name is arranged, where there are these vertical and first of all, there's a sort of base plane of terracotta. Then there are the horizontal and vertical ribs, which are in terracotta, and they support the terracotta letters that make up the McGraw-Hill name. And you can see the planar relationships among these in the photograph on the left, bottom left. You see the planar relationship between the McGraw-Hill name area and the plane, the brick plane that is adjacent to it, and that then is intersected. You can just barely see it by the slightly projecting plane of the horizontal terracotta fin. So it's a wonderful Raymond Hood composition, very much typical of its style and character. Next. So there is a rendering of what it looks like. Also, you can see above the McGraw-Hill lettering is that chevron form of terracotta ornament. Next. So the McGraw-Hill has not been an occupant of the building for a long time. In fact, there have been other McGraw-Hill buildings. And the plan now is, well, thoroughly respecting the building as an architectural monument, thoroughly respecting its design and its materials, to make the major name of the building 330 West 42nd Street. And as you'll see, the 330 West 42nd Street address has always been part of the identity of the building as expressed in the original Raymond Hood design as well. Next. So there's a comparison. What we are proposing would be to remove the McGraw Hill letters, to maintain everything else, including the terracotta backing and all of the ornamental surrounds, and to replace it with the 330 West 42nd Street letters and numerals in the same graphic style, that classic sans serif Art Deco style, international style, and with all of those relationships, all of those subtle planar relationships maintained. Just so you know, we had given some thought to the possibility of just of covering the McGraw Hill lettering and putting the 330 West 42nd Street over it, so that the McGraw Hill lettering would exist behind. The problem there is that because the letters themselves are about 4 inches deep, and the ribs behind are about 4 inches deep, and the structural wall or plane that we would need to create in order to support them would probably be something like 12 inches deep, we would end up with a new construction, if you will, that would project out beyond, far beyond the existing plane, and would really compromise all of those planar relationships. So we decided that using the same vocabulary, the same materials, the same dimensions, etc., would really be the best way and most respectful way to do this. Next. And there is a closer view. We're dealing with letters that are existing, 10'10" in height. Next. And we would have that same height, same dimensions, same everything, and again, including all of the terracotta and brick that is around it and supports it would all be the same material that is there now. Next. So here is the current on the left and the proposed on the right. This would really very much maintain the character of the building, its architectural vocabulary, its vocabulary of materials, design, color, etc. Next. And there's a sort of skyline view, not from the street, but from up in surrounding buildings where, as we hope you will agree, the character and presence of the building is very much maintained. Next. So we just want to make it clear that this is not a proposal that doesn't have context and, if you will, precedent in the landmarks process. Many landmark buildings, including quite significant individual landmarks, have had, with their changing identities and their changing occupancies, have had their signage change over the years with landmarks approval. On the left is 30 Rockefeller Center, originally the RCA building, and then the GE building, and now the Comcast building. And Landmarks has recognized those changes over the years. The one on the far right, of course, is the New York Times building, a very prominent building which carried the name of the Times who built the building. And of course, the Times is now gone, and the building is undergoing new use and new tenancy. And Landmarks has recognized that and has approved that change. In their approvals, Landmarks generally talks about the materials, the scale, the positioning, the architectural character and style of the individual letters and numbers on the signage, and they very regularly allow for these kinds of changes, recognizing the changing tendencies, as long as those changes are done respectfully in terms of all of those elements that I just described. So this proposal does come in a context, and it does not break ground that would not be quite familiar to the Landmarks Commission. Next. That's the first chapter of 4. The second one, and please questions at any time you prefer to ask them. The second chapter, sorry.
If we can get through the presentation first and then take questions,
That's
I think
great.
that.
I just wanted to offer you, whatever opportunity you wanted to take. So second is also about the name change. This is on the 42nd Street storefront at the main entrance. Next. So some historical views. On the left, a circa 1931 view of the original identity. And it's interesting as a sort of hybrid. It includes the McGraw Hill name, and then below it in secondary but still sizable dimension is the 330 West 42nd Street address directly over the main entrance. The upper photograph on the right is about 1960, when the 330 disappeared and the McGraw Hill remained because they were still a major occupant of the building. And then by the 1980s, at least, the McGraw Hill name had left the main entry, and the name of GHI, a major occupant at the time, took its place in the same position, certainly not the same typeface or size, but the same basic logic of going in that sign band. Next. So here is the existing condition. There is no name in the sign band over the main entry, and the only marking is the 330 numerals, which I think you can barely make out in the horizontal transom above the doors. Next. So here are 3 elevations showing at the top the current condition, and in the center the previously approved condition. There is a master plan that was approved at staff level for storefront and signage, which included the conditions that you see in that center elevation, rendered elevation. There was not signage for the overall building that was approved by staff as part of this. They did approve signage, individual letters in the sort of transom band in the infill, storefront infill. And at the bottom is what we are proposing. So we're proposing the 330 West 42nd Street name in the same location and at the same scale that the McGraw Hill name appeared originally over the main entrance. We are also proposing, as you'll see in a second, to do a new set of entry doors to replace the existing non-original entry doors. And we'll go into that in more detail. Next. So there is that same order in original on the left, current in the center, and proposed on the right. So this shows what we're proposing in terms of the signage. It also gives you an idea of what we're proposing in terms of the doors. If you look on the left, the original doors, there were 4 of them, and they were 4 single leaf doors, not revolving doors. The doors themselves were 7 feet high originally. And they had this transom system above, and that included 2 horizontals, one above the doors and another one where the 330 signage was originally. Now, in the current condition, it has replaced all of the original doors and also the infill above the doors. That horizontal transom system has disappeared. What we are proposing for the doors now is shown on that right-hand drawing. The 7-foot doors, which we just felt were very small for the scale of the building, and because we would not be changing either original fabric or original in the doors or in the transoms, what we propose to do is to raise those doors from 7 feet to 8 feet 4 inches, and then to add back that major horizontal to be not strictly restorative, but to bring back a little bit of the sense of those transoms not just being single pieces of plate glass, but having a horizontal to give scale and further character to the transom system. Next. So these, if you want to go over them in detail, we can, but we're showing greater detail for both the original condition, the current condition, and the proposed condition. I told you the changes we were proposing for the door infill, but in terms of their recess and their relationship to the opening, width and depth, etc., those will all remain as they were originally. So none of that basic sort of geometry will change. So that's the historic condition. Next. This is the existing condition, and next. This is what we are proposing for the signage and the infill. Next. And that is a comparison of the original and proposed signage. Next. One more.
Sorry, I think it froze. Give me one moment.
Sure.
While we're waiting, Bill, could
Yeah.
you explain what's the difference between Art Deco and the international style? In other words, Art Deco's on the top, but the whole building's international style.
Well,
very similar, right?
Well, the thing is, like so many architectural styles, one sort of transitions into the other. Art Deco was a style mainly of the 1920s, and in a sense, it wasn't yet fully modern. It included much more sort of stylized classical design and classical ornament. And then by the time you got to the international style in the 30s, it was much more what we would now, I think, consider modern. Less ornament, more sort of plate glass, more about geometry and materials than about ornament. So with for example, up on the top of the building with that chevron treatment, that's hearkening a little bit back to the Art Deco, but the clean geometry of the whole arrangement is much more looking forward to the international style. So no style is 100% pure,
Gotcha.
but it's primarily an international style building, more of the the modern vocabulary. If you're looking for more of a, as you probably know, if you're looking for more of an Art Deco vocabulary in the work of Raymond Hood, you really would go to the American Radiator building
Gotcha.
on 40th
Thank
Street.
Thanks, Bill. I think we're back now.
Great. So the third out of the 4 chapters is the 41st Street storefront. Next. So here are some existing photographs. It's very much a sort of functional and considerably altered, especially in terms of its infill, sort of working side of the building, south side of the building. It's almost all roll down loading dock doors, except on the far right, and that center photograph down in the bottom, where there has been, since the building was built, a sort of secondary entry into the building. Simple, not as fully detailed or stylistic as on 42nd Street, but a functioning building entry in any case. And if you look at the infill, you'll see that it's pushed quite close to the faces of the columns that support the building. It's a very sort of planar, shallow kind of treatment. Next. The original condition, as you can see in the photo on the left, in terms of that infill, was the depth of the infill was quite different. The infill still very simple, roll down loading dock doors, was held back, so you got the expression of the full depth of those piers, which is not the case now. And on the right, it's hard to see because of shadow, but that's where that secondary entrance to the building was, at the far right or east end of that 41st Street elevation. Next. So this shows what we are proposing. We are proposing this to remain the main loading dock area of the building, but also, because we don't need all of those loading docks, and we'd like to express more of the vitality that will be happening inside the building, we're proposing to replace 3 of those non-original roll-down loading dock infills with glazed infill that allows you to see into the public spaces of the building. We wanted to keep the infill, pretty simple, but we felt that having at least some division horizontally and vertically would blend the language of the infill more with the overall language of glazed openings throughout the facade. And next. So this is a comparison, the existing condition above and the proposed condition below. It's actually pretty difficult to present this because the major change that, not change, but the new entry that we are proposing on the far right is covered up by the postage stamp images of all of us. I'm not quite sure how to move those. Maybe Janine knows better than I. But we're proposing a new entrance in the same area of the existing one. It's a secondary entrance into the building, and although we're proposing it to have a bit more architectural character, we are still proposing quite a simple and understated treatment, and there too, with that very simple projecting canopy to protect the entrance, we would be proposing the oh, thanks. I got a note saying I can move us around. Should have known that. Proposing to do that simple canopy with just the address of the building on it. Next. And there's a detail of existing. If you look particularly at that section on the right, you'll see that those roll down gates are pushed right to the front of the building, and the operable housing of those projects out from the building. That's not the original condition, and it really kind of masks the whole original treatment. Next. So this is what we are proposing for the infill of those newly glazed areas, where we're holding that glazed infill back so that the depth of the column that supports it is expressed as it was originally. And next, this is what the center shows what we are proposing for the loading dock bays, where again we'd be holding the roll up door back, and we'd be keeping its housing on the interior rather than the exterior. Next. And there is a rendering of what we are proposing for that new secondary entry in the location of the existing secondary entry. And next, elevations and sections showing existing, and then I think proposed conditions. Next, and that's the proposed. And next, comparative photograph on the left, original condition, rendering on the right of proposed. And I think you see that, while we are introducing a new entry and new glazing, we really want to keep with the basic sort of geometry and kind of functional character of the original. Next. So this brings us to the final chapter. These are terrace doors. Next. So I don't want to oversimplify this, but in order to tell the whole story visually, there are lots of images here, but I don't think we need to really overly concentrate on each one, because the story is basically pretty simple. There are 4 terraces at the 11th, 16th, 32nd, and 34th floors. And the south elevation, I believe, has 5, one at the 8th floor. And these are set quite far back. They include those ribbon windows that open out onto the terrace. And each of the terraces has some doors that lead out to them. Many of them are in new openings that were previously windows, and some of them are original openings with later doors. And when you actually see them from the street, they are hardly visible because of the angle at which you're seeing them and the depth of the terraces. So you're really kind of only seeing the tops, hardly distinguishable from the windows. But we need to include them in the public hearing for sort of procedural reasons, because they are changes that are being proposed on formal facades of the building. And so they need to be reviewed at commission level rather than at staff level. But I just wanted to sort of tell you the overall story here. And that I think will allow us to go through the images more efficiently. Next. So that is that south elevation of the building, showing that there are 5 terraces there instead of the 4. Next. And here are the terraces and the setbacks as they show from the street. I think you can see that the setbacks are all pretty deep. I don't recall exactly the dimensions, but we're probably in the 12 to 15 foot range, I think, at least at the lower ones. I think you can also see here that while you kind of catch a glimpse of the tops of the window and door infill, there's something that are pretty close to not being visible because of the depth and height of the setbacks. Next. And this shows the same condition. Next. Same. And next. So the variety of door infill that we have, the doors are all metal or metal clad doors. Some of them are very recent aluminum. Some of them are non-original but less recent flat doors as on the left there. And then there are a couple of those double leaf doors, which are not original, but they are earlier than the other infills, but they do not show up on the original plans for the building. That's kind of the nature of the doors that we are proposing to change. Next. And what we are proposing for the new door typically is what you see on the right, where we are proposing, instead of just making it a fully glazed door or a single glazed panel, we thought that it would make the most sense to do horizontal muntin divisions, so that the doors have some scale that does not duplicate, but relates to and harmonizes with the adjacent windows. But again, this is going to be hardly visible from the street. Next. Just a view of existing conditions. Everything up there is thoroughly functional now, utilitarian, but we are proposing to make these usable terraces, to move most or all of the HVAC off to non-visible areas elsewhere in the building. Next. And then we've got an endless number of these color-coded elevations showing terrace by terrace where there are openings, which ones are non-historic, which are the pink one, non-historic, which are the pink ones, and those very few yellow ones, which are original. And we are not proposing to create any new openings. There are a couple of cases where we're proposing to put the non-original door openings back to windows that they originally were. But in most cases, we're just proposing to remove those non-original doors and put new ones in of the kind that we showed you. And we can just keep going through the rest of these unless someone wants to stop with a question. Next. Yep. Janine, if you don't mind, you can just kind of keep going through those until we reach the rendering. Keep going. Thank you. This is not something anybody will see from the street, but it does give an idea not only of what we're proposing to do with the doors, but it goes back to Dan's original observation about having a wonderful historic building to start out with, and doing what we can to respect it, but also revitalize it at the same time. And Dan, if you'd like to add anything or expand, please go ahead.
Well, Bill, I really don't, and thank you very much for that, and especially your answer to Jay-Z's question on the international style, because I think you nailed that. And what's unique about this building that Raymond Hood did, who really is, as we all know, the father of the modern skyscraper, in creating this building, which was not only the headquarters and publishing house, but it was actually the printing house as well. So by virtue of that, it really was this amazing machine for work. And it has high floor to floors, large operable windows, and these terrific setbacks. And just in recognition of that, it really is the most modern building for today's tenancy. And all of these things that we're doing inside and outside, and Bill alluded, we're removing nearly all, I think all of the mechanical systems that have been put on these setbacks indiscriminately. We're removing all of that and changing the system such that we don't have those exposures, and the cooling towers are being put up behind the bulkhead that Bill described earlier. So it really becomes the clean building that it started with, and transformed during this new renovation into a very healthy, very efficient workplace for today's tenancy. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan, thank you. Bill?
And you.
Dan, Bill, thank you very much for that presentation. I hope you won't mind taking some questions
Not at all.
from community board members. I just have one question with clarification. The back on 41st Street,
Yes.
you know there's going to be a new Port Authority terminal going up. I hope you all are aware of that.
Yes, we're aware of the numerous plans in place for the future of the Port Authority, whether or not it's connected to the convention center, whether or not there's a new tower put on, you know, there are any number of them, but anything certainly will improve the 41st Street character. But we really have put a lot of focus on 41st Street, opening the building up. A result of pandemic redesign will be multiple entrances so that the comers and the people who come in and go in from the building have choices. And we also want that, as Bill alluded to, there's a public a space for the tenants in the building in there, which was the old loading docks. So it's an important facade, and we hope that the Port Authority's improvements one day really revitalizes 41st Street, which is certainly a neglected street.
Thanks, Dan. If you don't mind, I think I'm sure the committee will have some questions. Anybody have a raise your hand? I'll try to keep order. Janine will keep order. So I don't know who raised their hand first. Janine, do you know? I know
Brian
Brian.
Weber had his hand
Yeah,
up
Brian
first.
Weber, then Dolores, James, and Leslie.
I'm sorry, say again.
It's Brian, Dolores, James, and Leslie.
Okay, Brian Weber, welcome.
Hi. Hi, thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you for that presentation. It was very thorough. I know I love that building. I know it's a beloved building in this community. I don't have many issues with your redesign, except one major one. I would love to see that McGraw Hill remain there. When the RCA was named GE, it was taken over by a different corporation. Here you were suggesting, which does not have the grandeur of McGraw Hill. And to this neighborhood, I think that will always be the McGraw Hill building. So I would argue against it if it was Yahoo taking it over and wanted to name it the Yahoo building, but it's not. It's just an address. So I request that we maintain the McGraw Hill. That said, if that must be changed, and I don't think it must, there's an inconsistency with the font that you're using on the crown and the font that you're using on street level, noted in the 330. So I'm curious as to why that is, and if the font that you are in fact using is font that was signed by Raymond Hood, or if it's standard font, what is the name of the font?
Brian, just to clarify, you're objecting to the top being changed, or or both?
Yeah, I don't. I actually
Okay.
no reservations about it being changed at street level to say 330 West 42nd Street. It's just really the crown. I mean, that is, McGraw Hill is this neighborhood since my childhood, so, and long before then.
Gotcha, Brian. Bill, what about that font?
Bill, do you want me to answer it?
Dan, yes, why don't you? Go ahead.
So Brian, thank you. And we certainly understand your concern at the top. But to answer your question specifically about the fonts, they are slightly different at the top and the bottom. The top, even in some of the characters, and we're following the two different pieces that did occur. The font name I will get from you. We had a very accomplished graphic designer, Doyle Associates, spend quite a bit of time on this, researching it and kerning all the letters to be most consistent with the signs. And up top, of course, is terracotta, and it's predominantly gray. Down below, it's bronze with the orange highlights. So they were always different, the top and the bottom. And slightly, you're correct. There's some slight variations from the original in the font it's playing a little creatively with the font itself. So we'll follow up with the font name as you asked.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Brian.
But sorry, the bigger question is the changing of the name, and I don't know if anyone else on the board would like to sort of opine.
Well, other people are going to speak, Brian, but we got that.
Don't worry, Brian.
Dolores.
Yeah, my initial reaction was thinking about the Pan Am building being changed to the MetLife building. I still call it the Pan Am building because that's my reference to it. I respect the thoughtfulness in terms of design to keep that consistency, but why put an address at the top of a building?
Okay.
That just doesn't make sense to me. You name a building. You don't address a building at its top. So the idea of it seems to me foolish, because why are you putting the address up there? It's not as if, well, maybe when drones start delivering our mail, et cetera, maybe that might be helpful. But I almost wanted to see nothing up there if you were not going to keep the McGraw Hill name. And I wanted to just touch on, JD asked the question about, are you aware what's happening with Port Authority? Joe's probably going to go into much more detail about that, but you really need to be aware of what's going on at Port Authority, because that's going to change the entire nature of that block. And also with all the infrastructure changes that are happening, you need to be in touch with what those changes are. But to the 41st Street side, if I'm understanding correctly, you plan for this building to be residential. I love the view. No? Okay.
No, Dolores, I'm sorry. It's staying office, commercial.
Oh, good.
Office.
Okay.
Yes,
okay. That was my concern, because that one image you had of the terraces looked a little residential.
My
But
apologies for not making that clear. That's the first thing I should have said.
it's okay. I'm glad we had an opportunity to clarify that now. But more importantly, I love the view of the glazed over areas where you have the loading docks. That's beautiful. It looks lovely. But my concern is this is a huge building, residential or not. There's a lot of activity. My concern is where you still will have the opportunity for safely loading, unloading, dealing with trash, et cetera. So just, again, that's not about the look. That's just thinking about the fact that specifically in our neighborhood, we have a lot of large buildings that don't solve for trash, et cetera. And you happen to have those spaces now. So just wanted to point that out. And one last question on 41st Street, just before you respond. One of the renderings had an awning on that egress regress area. I don't know if that was part of the plan or that was an older one, because, oh, it is. Okay. That was it.
So Dolores, just to respond to the loading dock, there were two parts of the equation with regard to reducing the number. First off, obviously there were an enormous amount of loading docks because that's what it did. It brought all the paper in and all the printed material out very effectively. We are per code in zoning with regard to the number of docks, 3, and we spent a lot of time with building management with how they bring goods in and remove the refuse. And they feel very certain that the quantity is adequate so that, of course, we don't restrict traffic flow there. And I would love to know more about, because we really haven't, we've tried to get, and then since you're part of the public, I'm sure you've seen presentations on that. And if you could direct us toward the current presentations on the Port Authority, we would benefit greatly from that. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. James, thank you, Dolores. James, I think you were next.
Awesome. Thanks, JD. First, great presentation, William and Dan or Bill. The building, the McGraw Hill building, is a building that I actually occupied with my business for a year before they, asked everyone to leave. Obviously, MCB4's offices were in there as well. So I actually know this building more than most, and I have a couple of opinions. I love what you're doing with 41st Street. I'm a little concerned, as Dolores and I think Brian mentioned, about the capacity and the ability, because I had personal experience with this. If any of the scaffolding should break, or once one or two are occupied, that was a major issue. And we moved out during the pandemic, so that was a little challenging. But I would just, that's a little iffy. But at the end of the day, that's something you have to deal with. But the public has to deal with it because of the in and out. With regard to the crown signage, I guess my question is, for how many buildings, and this is more a question for Mr. Higgins, for how many buildings, to your knowledge, has the Landmarks Preservation Commission required the retention of the name as part of the landmark? Because you highlighted that there is precedent to change it, but my question is, has LPC required its retention?
That's an interesting question, not to my recollection.
Okay. So
there may be cases that I don't know of.
sure.
But
so let me follow up. So my concern is, I just brought up the LPC original designation from 1979, and it's actually referred to as an integral part and the crowning achievement. Like it's not like just a freestanding sign. It's integral. It's built in. It's describing the letters and their construction. So, aside from all the great points that Dolores made, that's my concern. Let me move on. I have a question about the interior. I know at the top, JD asked you about the interior. You said it wasn't landmark. In the original landmark designation, there's a whole half page talking about the interior. So my question is, what are the plans for the interior? Because having, again, been in and out of that building every day, every work day for a year, I find the interior to be an amazing example of interior Art Deco. And to have that changed or destroyed would be a terrible, terrible loss. So if you could address that. And my last question is, when will the scaffolding be removed? The scaffolding has been a problem for a very long time. It houses people that shouldn't be loitering, that are, as someone who went in and out of there, again, for a year, there were points at which police had to be called because of not just panhandling, but aggressive panhandling, drug dealing, certainly not made better by the pandemic or the issues with shelters in the area. So thank you, and I look forward to your answers.
Thank you, James.
Okay. With respect to the architectural integrity of the crown and the way it's designed, I certainly think it's absolutely right for the designation report to talk in detail about the entire crown, including the McGraw Hill name, and its character. But in the approvals that the commission has given for changes to signage, they almost always talk about, I won't do this exhaustively, but for example, in the RCA building, Landmark said when it was changed to GE in 1988, the proposed top signage for the top of the building replicates the location, scale, and character of the original and existing neon signage, maintains the color of the existing neon. Proposed signage will not alter the character of Raymond Hood's slab design and carefully detailed setbacks. That's kind of typical of the kind of language that Landmarks uses when they approve changes to original or long present signage. They think about how the proposed new signage relates to the original design and the character and the detailing, etc. I find that Landmarks does not, I can't think of a case where they have said, look, this is what it's called. The RCA building is the RCA building. That's what everybody remembers it as. The Radio Corporation of America was arguably the corporation that started the entirety of the communications industry in the country, et cetera. Do not change that name. Similarly with the New York Times. I think that
I'm sorry, Mr. Higgins.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of the other panelists'
okay,
questions.
fine.
So if we could move on to the other question
Sure.
I had.
Okay. Dan, do you want to address that?
Yeah, but Bill, if you could first just clarify that the interiors are not part of the landmark designation. They're described, but they are not designated as a landmark.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right, but
So-
are there plans to,
Yeah, so
to retain
Jim or
preserve-
James, yeah, we're in the midst of creating plans for the interior entry sequence, the lobby to the building. They're progressing, they're not complete. There will be changes to that lobby. A lot of that material is not original, a lot of it. The green glass, the light fixtures, the entire ceiling system, some of the flooring is, some of the base is. But there will be changes to the lobby to respond to more of an appropriate entry for a large building and its guests like that. It's a very small lobby. We haven't completed those. They're in progress, but there will be changes to that lobby.
Will any attempt be made to retain the Art Deco character?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank
James,
you.
question about the
And-
scaffolding.
We're mindful of the heritage and the material. The scaffolding, Eric made, they're right now on the windows per previous applications and approvals are being changed. And I'm not sure of the time on that. And if Eric, who represents ownership, isn't on, we'll get you that answer. Obviously, the building is predominantly empty now because the union moved out. That's why this is happening. And the development goals are clearly to bring the building back online as soon as possible.
Thank you,
I
Dan.
understand your concern.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dan. Thank you, James. Janine, who was after James? You
I
recall?
was. Les.
Leslie.
Les,
I
yes.
see up there in the corner.
I have a quick question. It's a follow-up to Brian Weber's question, and I wasn't sure if I saw it in the photographs. Does the southern side of the building also have a McGraw Hill signage
Yes.
on the crown?
Yes. Same. Mirror
So-
mirror image of the north.
So what will happen to the south side?
Same thing.
I see.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Who's next, Janine? Joe?
Joe and then Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, Chris?
So a couple of things. Sorry, Joe or Chris?
It would be Joe then me, but I actually was going to keep it brief if Joe wouldn't mind me speaking first.
Go right ahead, Chris.
Chris.
Thank
go
you very
ahead.
much, Joe. Thank you very much, JD. I'm just going to echo the sentiments of Dolores and Brian on 9/11 McGraw Hill. Staring at that from my rooftop on 47th Street was something that didn't change, and it means a lot to this community. I'll also echo James's sentiments there as well as it relates to preservation. The setbacks I'm curious about. Will tenants be able to have access to these setback decks, and if so, what precautions are you planning to prevent suicides? Suicides jumping up in number right now.
Good question, Chris.
Chris, thank you very much. Yes, terraces, outdoor space in New York, for the past decade has become valued and seen as part of a healthy workplace as well as residents. So they will be made available for tenant use. And to your end, you're exactly right. The requirement for guardrails on setback terraces is 42 inches by code, New York City building code. We do not find that to be adequate for these heights. And there is a design to alter very discreetly. It's part of the staff approval. The beautiful orange rail, it happens behind it. You can't see really what's going on there, to extend that height to 48 inches. Very important, so that it creates the safest possible condition there. There are also codes and building restrictions for what tenants can do there. So in just to mention that, it's not permissible to build in a tenant fit out anything adjacent to the guardrail, which could become a step that could make a less safe environment. So,
Correct.
Chris, your comment is very important to the protection of everyone in and around the building.
Thank you, Dan. Good question, Chris. Very important.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you much, JD. And Joe, would love to hear about all these plans for our transportation center next door.
Joe.
Sure. So first, thank you very much for the work on the 42nd Street storefront and the sign. That looks great. The 41st Street side, there's a question about the use of that glass. Let's come back to that in a second. And the terrace doors also look very well done. Let me first talk about Port Authority. I think you need to rethink just having a fixed storefront, fixed glass on 41st Street. The current plans for Port Authority, which we would have gotten presented tonight at this meeting, except for a delay by the governor's office in making the announcement. There are no multiple plans anymore. There is one plan. There will be a large office tower on 42nd and 8th. So that's one of the things I just wanted to bring to you to the ownership especially. That means that most likely the majority of the windows facing east will be covered as part of the Port Authority's full plan. So just please be aware of that, important. Second, the Port Authority reconstruction of the actual terminal will end up with ground floor retail throughout the entire 8th Avenue, 41st, 40th, and 9th Avenue sides. There will be retail along the base of the terminal. It will no longer be just the garage and stuff. That is all being moved to different levels. So you may want to reconsider this just being a fixed glass thing, because there will be storefronts immediately opposite you on 41st Street. And 41st Street will change dramatically what it looks like. That is not a pie in the sky thought anymore. I want to assure you this project is proceeding ahead. We are about to start 3 years of public approvals, followed by 7 years of construction. That is going to happen. So just kind of put that in your mix. Now let me speak a little bit about the sign on the top. So you showed us 3 examples, Bill. Unfortunately, those are all signs that are affixed to buildings one way or the other, whether they're in neon or they're in a scaffold. That is not the case here. This is part of the original masonry of the building and is integral to its identity. The idea of removing the masonry and putting a new sign on top, it's not a sign, Scott's calling it a sign. It's part of the fabric of the building. It's the terracotta. I cannot support that change. I think a lot of our board members will feel very uncomfortable about it. I've been going to the building for only 41 years, to the community board office, but it is basically was the largest building, as you know, built on the west side for one simple reason. It was west of 8th, and you could build a manufacturing building on the lower floors for the printing to happen with McGraw Hill above. I would very much request that the client reconsider that, because it just simply creates controversy where none is needed in something that you've been so thoughtful and, just so really thought this out to make it work. And I'm really pleased because we had understood from the board, the building was being converted to residential. It's staying office makes perfect sense. It is sitting on top of 12 subway lines. That's the right place to have, commercial space, and bringing it to the 21st century is fantastic. But consider seriously. Instead, I would say, think about this as like the Puck building or Macy's. When those buildings there's changes that happens there, we're not going to rip those names off. Instead, you celebrate them and use it in all of your advertising. And McGraw Hill can't say much about it because the sign is there, right? So you got to figure out how you manage that through. But this is a icon on the west side, and I think we're going to ask that it be respected. as opposed to change in this way. It's not a sign, it's a piece of terracotta that's unbelievable that happened in that period of time. And it's been a beacon because this was such wildly out of scale to everything else. And I know you've done a great job to sell it, and I appreciate that. And I know that the client wants it too, but you have to hear probably not a good idea to avoid, if you want to avoid controversy. And I note that to Julie, who understands how these things go.
Joe, thank you.
May I just respond to
Of course, Bill. Of course, Bill. Go ahead.
I think that everyone has made that point very thoughtfully and very sensitively. And we will certainly talk about this as a team. And I think I can speak for Dan in saying that we will bring it to the client with as much of the color and feeling that you have and thought that all of you have offered in your comments. So we will certainly consider this carefully, and we thank you for your comments.
And we thank you for that comment, Bill. Anybody else on the committee want to raise an issue or have a comment? If not, Janine, is anybody from the public or the community calling in?
No, I don't see anybody's hands up.
Okay, I think we can then wrap this up. But first of all, Bill and Dan, thank you so much for that presentation and your team, and for listening to our concerns. I know Bob Benfato, who's a member of this committee, worked in that building as our district manager for many years. I think if his name went up on the crown, we might, or Jesse Bodine would fit in there, our new district manager. I think we could put that up there. But I think you've heard our concerns about this. And my own feeling is I think the job you're doing is just beautiful and careful. And certainly the concern about the interior that James raised is also very much a concern of this board. We've all gone in and out of that building for 100 years, it seems like, cumulatively. So we do appreciate it. There was one comment from Dolores. Go ahead.
Actually, it's a question for Dan and Bill. At this time, are you needing a response for the community to move forward, or are you just providing us with the update this evening?
This is their application, right?
Yeah, no, we're scheduled for a public hearing at Landmarks. Yeah.
Okay.
So
we need a resolution.
Okay, before we get there, I think James had a question or a comment.
Yeah,
James?
two quick things. Based on your current timelines, and of course this can change, what is your planned / projected reopening date? Or is it going to be phased and like rolled out over, phased construction, phased opening? And then the other question was regarding the elevators. As a former tenant, I can tell you that there were serious problems with the elevators, and now that's only going to be exacerbated now that, coronavirus has hit. Literally at one time, there was only one operating elevator for a whole stack, and people were waiting downstairs for 2 hours. And I actually ended up walking up 17 flights of stairs, which I will never do again because I will survive. All that being said, I want you to know it's a great building. I would love to go back in it.
James would love to have you 2 answers. We're looking at a 2-year build for sure. It's a major, all the infrastructure in the building is being redone. The vertical transportation system, the elevators are significantly changing, but the great gift of this building and having just about to finish another printing house on 10th Avenue, 460 West 34th Street, or now 410 10th Avenue, printing houses had enormous elevators. And we are repurposing all of those elevators to passenger and adding some that were taken out. So the building will have Class A elevator service. So when you come back, you won't have to wait. Your intervals will be well within reason.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, James. Bill, thank you for that.
Can I make a motion?
As soon as I finish, you can, yes. Thank you for that architectural history. Thank you, Joe, for that historical history of the building. Dolores, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to be supportive of the changes that have been made, with the caveat that the the signage or the fabric of the building saying McGraw Hill is maintained. Would also like to note, even though it's not required, our concerns about being respectful to the Art Deco design of the interior, and making some points about the frosted area in the back, to think about how that will relate to the Port Authority plans, and also to ensure that the utmost safety is taken with the terraces as in terms of protective surroundings, the height of those barriers, et cetera.
Thank you, Dolores.
That may have been it, Joe. Did I miss one of the points you made?
You've missed a couple, but we'll get to them.
Well,
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion about this? I think we want to add to that, perhaps, Joe?
Yeah, I just want to note that we should be very clear. We support the 3 items. We do not support the change in the name, so it's extremely specific on that. And then to pick up on James's comment that we understand that the lobby is not landmarked, but there have been changes there, but there is still the actual metal walls, a majority are there. We'd like you to respond to how you're going to modify that. We know it has to be larger for the size building. It's too small for today. How do you maintain that? And that's a question for you, Bill, more. What is the fabric you maintain while accommodating the new use, right? So I think we want to ask that question. And then the very last thing, and I guess I put this to Dan, is the top floor has that incredible McGraw Hill room. Is that going to be retained at all? The whole.
Just to answer that, that it's very interesting what happened at the very top floors. They had been converted sometime to a private apartment use, and we have removed that. We've reallocated and in application, putting that into the office use as part of other work. A lot of the windows had been spandreled over, and they're being reopened to the existing conditions, so that much more light and air. And that's a 2-story high space with a wonderful truss, steel truss in it, and that's all now back available to use, which is just terrific.
Okay.
All the finishes, of course, had been long taken out of the building. There are some nice remnants throughout the building. There are the floor indicators in some of the old floors that are in terrazzo, and we're maintaining all of those pieces as well. I think they're just wonderful.
Thank you, Dan. Any other comments? If not, we have a motion to thank Bill and Dan and your team, and to generally support what you're doing and praise what you're doing. But we do have some concerns about the interior, the scaffolding, the terrace guardrails, the elevators, how you're going to relate to Port Authority Terminal, and we are not happy with changing the name on the crown, unless it's named after Jesse Bodine or Bob Benfato. And
I was going to say, we're not in support of that, period. So let's
right.
What?
Not in support of it at all, but generally supportive of the other changes, with some concerns we'd like to express.
And the lobby.
Exactly, the interior. Yes.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
I guess you can just raise your hand. Anybody opposed? Anybody present not eligible to vote? Again, Dan and Bill and your team, thank you so much for engaging with us on this.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to stay for a rather small item, which is about the discussion of the draft scope for the draft environmental impact statement for Citywide Hotel Text Amendment. I know everybody has read that.
I do want to be invited back for the Port Authority when the governor's ready.
Absolutely. That should be next month, Dan, we hope.
Thank
At
you.
our February meeting, it's going to happen.
We will attend. It's very important. Yeah, it's going to
That's
take
great.
time, obviously.
Second
Thank you.
Oh,
Wednesday.
it's going to be announced next week, so be aware.
No, I'm saying the development itself
Oh.
will take quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
you.
Janine,
Thank
we
you.
want to make sure that Bill and Dan are invited to the Land Use Committee in February. So
Thank you.
I know we've all read this, and the general gist is the city is saying by 2025, we're going to need more hotels because all the tourists are coming back. That's what they say. So they're proposing, I see somebody who has read it. This guy with a glass. Oh, sir, you're raising your hand.
Yeah. I was waiting for that, JD. So I just want to know, I had a summary done by Savannah Wu, our community planner, Clinton Housing, to pull it all together. But everyone should understand this is almost exactly the same review and action that we took in 2018 when this special permit was proposed for sites in M zones. So now that's being extended to commercial zones, to C zones. Our position at that point in time is that we appreciated the different types of the special permit findings, and we supported them. However, we found exception to the exception, and that public purpose or facilities, basically like a homeless shelter, are not subject to the special permit. So I'm going to recommend that we return to our original position, which we talked about in the M zones, that it is bizarre that there's going to be a special permit anytime a hotel is even, proposed, except if a building that's classified as a transient hotel used for a homeless shelter, for example, is not subject to the same review. Somehow the idea that a social service facility should not be subject to review doesn't seem to make sense. But especially since what we've lived through in our neighborhood in the past, 9 months, I think we're all realizing that careful public review is the difference between success or total disaster. And that is my recommendation, because this is not new. This is the exact same text that we approved in 2018, now applied citywide to commercial zones.
And
I'll
Joe,
take any questions.
those commercial zones in Hell's Kitchen are where? The Garment over an 8th?
So the garment zone, the garment center between 8th and 9th is a C64M.
The old P2.
It's the old P2 from 35th to 41st Streets. That is really where we have a lot of hotels that have obviously been built. That will be subject now to this, but that was already subject because that got slipped into the Garment Center Special Zoning District via that zoning. Where could hotels be built? They could be built on 34th, 42nd, 57th. They could be built in a C zone that is further west in Hudson Yards, anywhere we're seeing a C zone. And in Chelsea, there's a lot of commercial zoning. So for example, in the West Chelsea Special Zoning District, it's C62 all along 11th Avenue and parts of 23rd Street. There could be hotels built. So this would mean anytime a hotel was proposed, it would come through for a special permit and a public review.
There's a lot of spots in Chelsea it could be.
Yeah, a lot more in Chelsea than north, actually.
And Joe, what about west of 11th Avenue?
11th Avenue is the M zone, and it's already covered in the prior zoning that happened. We only have one hotel there right now on 11th in the 40s, the Ink Hotel on 48th. But that was already built as part of the M zone. The zoning that happened in 2018 would cover that entire district between 11th and 12th.
Okay. Joe, thank you for that report. Do we have anybody want to weigh in on this? Anybody want to propose that how we respond to this? No response, no letter, great.
I do what Joe said about it.
Joe, I had a question, actually.
Yeah.
So while I was at City Council, there was conversation, particularly in a district that I was serving, which was the 41st, on building out legislation that would require public review of any change from a hotel to a social service site, because that area is still a cluster area, as is the adjacent district in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Ocean Hill. What stops the city, like with this particular zoning text? What safeguards do we have in our public review that a hotel's proposed in the old P2 that or a commercial district that, like, if we look at the design, we go, okay, well, this looks like it's a ready-to-made social service site. Like, there's no real intention for a hotel to be used here. It's going to go immediately to social services. What safeguards do we have?
Well, the actual hotel permit says what the use is. So if they went through the process, they got to grant a special permit, then they occupy it contrary to the permit, they have a huge issue with that, Chris. But the problem is that the city, in both the 2018 version and the updated version for 2021, it accepts out social service. Now, I know that Brad Hoylman has proposed a bill in the legislature, in the Senate.
In the Senate, correct.
In the Senate to actually, we're not there yet. And a lot of times I say social change takes a long time to people to understand, like, there's a reason we do public review. I mean, what this will help is get rid of things like the 25-foot wide hotel that can't have a loading dock or this or that makes it impossible to function without causing traffic backups and stuff on the street. Because we
like
would
the
look at
W?
that and say, yeah, we would look at that and say, that doesn't make sense. It's too small. But I really think that as long as we take our prior position, but we should probably note, here's a good example of why you should come back for a special permit for homeless shelters, given our experience in the last 9 months, because great example of why it doesn't work when you don't talk about it in advance.
Great.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, JD.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chris, for the question. Again, do we need Bob, you were about to speak.
You asked for a motion. I was going to give a motion along the lines of what Joe said about the exception.
Okay.
I second.
What was the motion, Bob?
Along the lines of what Joe said.
Along the lines of what Joe said about the exception.
No, basically it's to go back to our 2018 position and just take it up again for the current version and then slap them with
what we already said.
How bad it was when you didn't review it,
Okay. Okay. Do we have a second on that? Dolores, I think you have a second. All in favor of Bob's motion? Anybody opposed? Anybody present not eligible? Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody. We have new business. We have one item of new business, or we could have one item of new business. I see a man that's about to, you sir, with your hand raised.
Can you hear me okay? I'm having some.
We hear you better now.
Okay.
You were very herky-jerky before.
Yeah, I'm very herky-jerky in real life. I'm just having some internet connections all the way into the pandemic. You'd think we'd have the Zoom call down. Aside from desperately needing a haircut, I've got to reboot my internet. Anyway, this kind of feeds off a little bit of our last conversation about hotels. I don't know if anyone heard the little item where Cuomo said that he would like to change zoning regulations and he said Midtown Manhattan to make commercial and hotels available to convert to supportive and affordable housing. And I've seen comments from Corey Johnson on this. So he chimed in and said he was very excited about that. And Gail Brewer also expressed her interest in this. But it was also a move that's been heavily supported by the Hotel Owners Association and REBNY. And I think that talking about the past 9 months, it's imperative that any plan of this nature receive public review, and that the hotels that potentially lend themselves to supportive housing are the value engineered budget hotels that are all over the West 30s and extend up into the 40s, the Sam Chang, Gene Kaufman hotels. And so I think it's imperative that if this is a plan that's going to go forward, it shouldn't be driven by the Hotel Owners Association and REBNY, but it should be something that's reviewed by our community. We do have, as we've discussed in countless meetings since I've been a member of this board, definitive affordable housing needs. And those should be front and center. And we shouldn't become the neighborhood that receives all of the social services just because we were inflicted with budget hotels that we didn't want in the first place. And I throw that to the board, see if you have any thoughts.
JD, you're on mute. JD, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Dolores. So Brian, this is not something that's out yet. It's something that's being floated that we should respond.
No, it was announced yesterday, JD.
Okay, so it's something we should respond. What exactly are we responding to?
It was the State of the Union address from the governor, State of the State.
Right, but is it Joe, go ahead.
So the problem is the governor has stated, here's something he wants to do.
Right.
There are zero details, but I think it's important, if there's zero details, we get in on this very soon. The idea is from my understanding, is that to use the state's authority to waive certain zoning regulations and requirements in order to allow buildings that would not normally conform to residential use to be used for residential use. And it's both hotels and commercial buildings. Now, this could be, if it's done well, a credible benefit for our community. So for example, those 6,000 hotel rooms that got built in the West 30s could be converted to residential use. That's a good thing, because we expected that to be those residential buildings. The problem is the discussion that the board had in the past 3 weeks with John Mudd from the Mid-South South Precinct Council and an organization that was basically advocating to convert hotels to supportive housing and to homeless shelters. It was like, just grab whatever's available and do it. So we're back to the non-planning stage and we just get things dumped on us. So I think we need to be able to say up front that in concept, this is not a bad idea, this could be a good idea, but in fact, this has to be planned, thought, and we want, and no matter what, we want a range of incomes. It's not just affordable housing and all supportive housing, because that's the easiest way to do it. So we have to say something.
And Joe, we want, as Brian said, we want community involvement in this, especially. Dolores.
Yeah, I agree that this is very important right now to make a comment, and not only to make a comment, but to explain the position. As we all know, Joe just said it, we didn't want these hotels to begin with, but because they're here, there's an opportunity, and that opportunity is being looked at only by the state as how to solve a problem. They're not thinking about that there's a community already here. And something I've been saying over the last few months over and over again is balance. We need balance. And I think it's important that we outline very clearly what has been the balance of this community, why this community has works, even though it has more than its fair share of supportive services throughout our district, but it's because we work with the local elected officials, we work with the agency to ensure that the placement is sited properly. But more importantly, I think we need to outline that this fits in with our affordable housing plan to begin with. And it's a plan, and we've had a plan. I think it's reintroducing the plan, and it's talking about what our concerns are about upsetting the balance. And I think we need to be very, very specific about the need for the community to be involved in this conversation and to be 100% opposed to this circumventing our land use process.
I'm going to suggest that Brian and Dolores write this letter because they have stated it very clearly and Brian brought it to our attention. All in favor of Dolores and Brian writing the letter? Anyway.
I make that motion.
We have a second?
I'm gonna keep my mouth closed from now on.
Anyway, that's, Brian, thank you for bringing this to the attention. And we need to, who do we send the letter to? All our
It's
elected?
got to go to the governor and to
Yeah.
the mayor and to city planning, like,
Okay.
right away. And to DHS too, so they don't get the ideas, grab every 300 unit hotel and
Yeah.
turn it into a shelter or supportive housing. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I'm sorry, was there a comment? If not, all in favor of Brian and Dolores writing the letter?
Should this also go to all of our elected officials?
always.
Always.
CC all elected officials, CC Vicky Bean, if she's still the deputy commissioner, deputy mayor.
Deputy mayor.
Pardon me,
She's
deputy
here.
mayor, thank you. So she's still here, get her on there right away, certainly.
Dolores, you voted twice? Was this two hands up? You had
I
two
did.
hands up. Okay. Any other new business? Brian, thank you for bringing that to the committee. Very important stuff. If there are no other, anybody want to bring up anything? No? That's
Oh,
good.
no, it was one from yesterday.
Oh, okay. Well, everybody stays.
Adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Can I motion?
All in favor. Thank you all so much for this meeting. Important stuff. Stay
Bob
safe.
Benfato wins best background.
On the- This actually used to belong to Chuck Spence, this painting. He gave it to Jenner as a gift when he moved to Hawaii.
Ah,
Chuck was an older board member who,
West 44th Street,
Mhm.
yeah,
president of West 44th Street Block
Yeah,
Association.
and former chair of BOP.
and he's doing well. He just sent me a card. I think he sent Joe a card. He's doing well in Hawaii.
If you're gonna pandemic somewhere, I'd say Hawaii is pretty good.
Yeah, I think so.
I guess so.
Good night, everybody.
Thank
Second.
Good night,
you.
everyone. God bless.
Thank you.